and that does offset a portion of the costs. Overtime and temporary labor is down from last year due to overtime budgeted at $120,000 less, offset in part by $30,000 in additional temporary staff for program initiatives. The overtime budget is based on a rolling 3-year average, and that rolling 3-year average went down by about 1% this last year due to lower overtime in our operations programs, which is great because
Aaron?
yeah.
Excuse me, back up to frictional vacancy insurance. What are we doing with that frictional delta there?
It's really just a reduction in labor that helps us to budget labor more accurately to how it will come in.
No, I understand that, but if we have positions that are unfilled, that's money that we're not having to spend, but we have that money, what are we doing with it?
It gets spent on other things, and it helps us come in and underneath the 5%. Yeah, it's not specifically earmarked for anything. It's just really part of that total operating budget that's available for other items.
So it's not earmarked necessarily for capital expenditures, or could it
Not
be for programming?
necessarily. Yeah, so from a budgeting perspective, any money that isn't needed for operations is used for capital expenditures if it isn't needed for debt service. So it does help free up resources that could be available for capital. The more that we can keep the operating budget down, the higher resources we'll have for the capital budget. And that's important, especially when we're faced with increasing costs on the capital side.
Of course, I just didn't know if we had a written policy regarding what to do with that frictional.
We don't currently, but it's something that we could look into. It's a relatively new item for us, a new consideration in our budget, and so we can look into further developing it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, next slide, please. So viewing the materials and services budget at the line of business and program level, more than half goes to operations, about 22% to environmental services, about 20% to business services, and the remainder goes to the non-capital portion of WES's capital delivery program. Next slide, please. So another way to view changes in the operating budget is by looking at the changes at the line of business level. And a lot of the changes in FTEs and total budgets here are driven by a reorganization of our work group structure that took place in the current fiscal year. We moved the asset management program from the capital management and planning line of business to operations, and we moved the resource recovery program out of operations and into environmental services. So you see those impacts in the total changes and the FTE shifts on these slides. So asset management has more FTE than the resource recovery program when it shifted into operations. The total FTE in the operations line of business increased by just over 2. This next year's budget includes increased spending on utilities and chemicals that we already covered, partially offset by that reduced repair and maintenance budget in the plant operations program, although the field operations program does include increased resources for tree removals and fence repairs. WES has performance targets for inspecting and cleaning wastewater collection system and maintaining our facilities, and the budget includes resources to continue meeting those targets. The metric under our old performance Clackamas plan was for 75% of maintenance to be proactive rather than reactive. That target was increased to 85% proactive maintenance next year under WES's new plan. And the operations current proactive maintenance ratios are just under 90%. That's pretty great because it places WES in the top 25% of wastewater utilities with respect to American Water Works Association's performance indicator benchmarking survey. So the operations programs have done a really good job managing their proactive versus reactive maintenance, and they'll be continuing that in this next year's budget. Thank you, Greg. Yep, that's a great way to summarize that. So cybersecurity is a focus for the entire county, and network penetration testing is scheduled to be completed this year. And WES is working with our technology services department on developing a cybersecurity policy and recovery plan. Those additional security measures will help WES to be able to qualify for higher cybersecurity insurance limits. We currently only qualify for the base level of insurance with current measures. So we're excited about increasing that coverage. And then supply chain issues during the last few years highlighted the need to maintain inventory of critical spare parts. And we're also going to be working on building an inventory and related tracking system this next year under the new strategic plan. Next slide, please. So environmental services, you can see that large increase in FTEs. That's from moving the resource recovery program into this line of business. The change in the budget is also from moving the resource recovery program's budget in, which is that budget's $1.9 million. So that accounts for most of the change. Major initiatives this year are related to regulatory drivers for Wes's municipal stormwater permit. And Christopher Bowker asked a great question about what are the regulatory drivers in Wes's budget. And when Ron and I met with you, Christopher, we didn't think of the MS4 permit requirements really being regulatory drivers, but they certainly are. In addition to proactive PFAS monitoring that this line of business will be taking part in, and developing a recycled water plan to explore using some of Wes's reuse water outside the plant rather than just for plant processes. All right, next slide, please. So capital planning and management, that FTE shift is from the asset management program moving to the operations line of business to align those services with the programs that program supports. This work group is focused on project planning, management, and delivery. So the operating budget is pretty minor because most of their budget is on the capital side and most of their labor is capitalized. Major projects for next year include the significant capital projects that we already saw, as well as updating Wes's hydraulic model to assess the success that the regional influent infiltration program has been having and developing program reporting for that to share out with the cities. Next slide, please. The business services slide, the total budget for this line of business isn't changing appreciably. There's a slight shift in FTE. Sometimes FTE from business services are allocated out among the other lines of business for support. Materials and services reflects a decrease due to reductions in advertising and marketing expenses and other professional services, offset by some of the increases that we talked about earlier to merchant services and insurance. A major initiative for this next year includes work on a workforce plan. We have about 8 to 10 employees that may be retiring in the next 5 years, and we want to have a plan in place to fill the knowledge gap that will cause. And we also want to have an understanding of Wes's workforce and if there's skills and talents we aren't using that could improve our resiliency. Records management system is another big initiative. When we moved to a partially remote workforce, we moved to digital record keeping, but we still have a lot of records that are on paper, and it's the only resource for that information. And so we're working to convert those to digital storage where they can be useful and more accessible. Another major initiative is updating Wes's customer assistance program, and we'll cover that a little bit more when we get to affordability. We also have resources budgeted to update both Wes's stormwater and sewer system development charge methodologies. The last update for sewer was in 2019, and rates have only been adjusted by an inflationary index since then. We proposed miscellaneous fee updates, and those will be considered by the board later this year. That's to ensure cost recovery of the non-rate revenues that Wes collects, things like septage charges, lien searches, as well as ensuring that the rates that we set for fees and fines, such as delinquent account fees and certifications, aren't being subsidized by our ratepayers. And then finally, a lot of our customer engagement for the Clean Water Exchange survey was focused on broad customer satisfaction metrics, assessing satisfaction overall with Wes's services. And the initiative in next year's budget for a customer satisfaction survey in this line of business will be focused more on customers' relationship to Wes in terms of billing, account management, direct contact with our customer service staff, and what we can do to improve their experiences. We're excited to be engaged in those projects this next year. Next slide, please. All right, so transitioning out of materials and services and into the other expenditure categories, all debt Wes incurs is for capital investments. So all debt is capital related, and the budget for debt service is just the principal and interest payments that are due on Wes's long-term debt. We're currently paying debt on the 2009 and 10 issuances that were used to pay for the liquids expansion at Tri-City. More recently, for the SRF loan that was used to finance the Tri-City Solids Handling Project. And we last issued debt in 2021, which is still being used to cover a portion of the Tri-City Outfall Project, as well as primary clarifier rehabilitation and other projects. So there's that slight increase there. We maintain a AAA rating, which is the highest bond rating that S&P Global Ratings gives out, and a testament to a strong financial position and good financial management. We're currently projecting a bond debt service coverage ratio of about 275%. The difference between actual debt service coverage and the required coverage of 120% represents our capacity to issue new debt. And so we have a fair amount of capacity currently. The category special payments covers right-of-way fees as well as Good Neighbor Fund contributions. And we've been really impressed with the way the cities have been utilizing WES's Good Neighbor funds over the past few years. I think every city has or is currently leveraging the funds that WES gives them with grant funding to be able to do bigger projects that are more impactful for their communities. So just kind of a shout out to Oregon City, Gladstone, and Milwaukee for creatively utilizing those funds and the specific projects that you guys are engaged in. We're really pleased to see that good work. Christopher.
Yeah, I had a quick question. A while ago, maybe it was William or someone had asked about your bond rating. And over the coming years, as you start to spend down your reserves, I think when that question was asked, you weren't entirely sure how that would affect your rating. Do you have like a better idea of in the next couple years, like are you at risk of that sort of dropping, or are you back on solid footing?
Yeah, great question. So the ratings agencies, when we issue debt, we pay to have the ratings agencies assess WES's bond rating, and they normally don't, they won't of their own accord look at WES's bond rating. So the next time we issue debt is projected to be 2026, 27. And at that time, we will have lower reserves. And that will probably result in a lower bond rating. We may not be able to maintain a AAA because this rating is based on really being able to not issue debt at all. And we will need to issue debt by that time. So we could go down to a AA plus, but it's hard to say exactly what our rating would be.
And so, okay, so that's helpful to know. So it sounds like we're sort of 3-4 years away from that happening. Does that have any concerning implications for WES? Or is it sort of, it sounds like you're planning for it, so it's probably smooth sailing?
Yeah, we have a pretty conservative estimate for the interest rate that we'll pay on new debt. It's around 3.5%. So the last debt we issued was 0.84%. So there's a healthy spread between the debt that we most recently issued based on our actual bond rating and the market conditions and the debt service that we're projecting in our long-range financial planning work. But usually when your rating goes down, you do pay a little bit extra in insurance. So there likely will be some additional insurance costs, but I think our long-range planning is accounting for that already. So I don't anticipate that we would see an impact on the rate forecast at all.
Okay, thank you.
Aaron, my experience was the difference between AAA and AA plus in terms of an interest charge is almost negligible. I mean, it's pretty small, right?
Yes, great point. I think the last time we looked at it, it was about a 0.1% difference. So it's really minor. Councillor Beck?
I was just going to comment as well that with the long-range financial planning that could potentially offset, because when they look at what you're doing, they look at it holistically. And so they will see that the reason your reserves are lower is because of the capital work that you've done. And then they see your long-term plans. So it's likely that you wouldn't even see a reduction.
Thank you. That's great context. All right. Next slide, please. And transitioning on to resources. So these are the current year revenues that WES is projecting to receive during 24-25. and that totals $69.9 million, consisting of about $67.1 million in revenues and other financing sources, which represent project contributions and grant funding of $2.8 million. So you'll recall that the spending was $129 million. There's a delta between revenues coming in next year and how much we'll be spending, and that's made up with the use of reserves. And most of those reserves are coming out of WES's construction and system development charge funds. The use of operating fund reserves that you see down there in that chart is just because we'll be ending this year with more reserves, reserves over WES's target level for operating reserves. So we're transferring those out of operating into construction. So it's really just a use of reserves for from construction and SDCs to utilize on our capital outlay. Most of WES's revenues are from sewer charges and surface water charges, as well as system development charges. Interest income has really increased this last year. And then other revenue sources include minor revenues like late fees, certification charges, title search fees, septage, and items like that. Next slide, please. So as the revenue history charts in this slide show, sewer and surface water charges increase fairly predictably from year to year as a result of steady rate increases and growth in our service area. System development charges can be relatively volatile as they're driven by development trends. So when housing development decreases, SDCs go down. They're also driven in large part by the timing of large multifamily developments. In 21-22, WES had 2 large multifamily developments that paid SDCs, I think, in May of that year. So that impacted that caused that spike that you see down there in the SDC revenue history. And then we went over this in the March budget preview, but the Federal Reserve has adjusted interest rates several times over the last few years to try to bring inflation down. And WES is seeing the positive impact of that. It's good not to have to issue debt when interest rates are high. It's good to have a lot of money invested where you can collect interest income when interest rates are high. So we've been taking advantage of that market condition and moving our cash balances into higher earning investments that we'll be able to cash out and that will mature as we need those resources for capital investments over the next couple of years. So we are projecting quite an increase in interest income next year relative to the budget, but a decrease relative to our estimate. We were too conservative when we budgeted interest during the current fiscal year and didn't account for the increases that the market saw. All right, next slide, please. All right, so contingencies and reserves make up the remainder of WES's budgeted requirements. And William asked a really great question about what the difference is between these two categories. So the full title of reserves is reserved for future expenditures. And as a budget category, reserves are intended to be saved for future years and are not appropriated. Whereas contingencies are funds that are appropriated for unforeseen expenses within the current budget period. So they're more flexible and they can be accessed relatively easily through a supplemental budget or a resolution transfer from the contingency category to another expense category, such as capital outlay or materials and services. So it's really just a way, contingencies are a way to ensure that funds are available for unexpected financial demands. Reserves are only able to be accessed under certain exceptions, such as emergencies, including natural disasters that require an immediate financial response. So WES wouldn't typically access reserves unless there was something extreme that required us to access those. We would instead rely on contingencies. Contingencies are budgeted at 60 days of WES's operating budget and 25% of our budgeted capital outlay. So the increase there is just really a reflection of the increase in WES's capital budget and the proportionate contingency based on that. And then we are spending down our reserve balance. You can see on this chart on the bottom that we've been building that up over the last several years. The large increase in 2021 was the result of issuing debt. We took out a $40 million loan with a $40 million revenue obligation with $8 million in premium. And we also had lower capital spending that year. So the fund balances went up quite a bit. Reserves have been built even over the last couple of years in 21-22 and 22-23 as we were in a planning phase for WES's capital improvement program. And we are anticipating to spend those down as construction picks up on those major projects. Next slide, please. All right, so Wes uses a revenue requirement approach to rate making, which just means that we charge the least amount required to meet projected needs. And there aren't any surprises here. The rate increases that we're proposing are 5% for each of Wes's primary wastewater treatment and collection services, as well as our surface water management services. These projections are in alignment with the advisory committee's recommendations and Wes's long-range financial planning work that we shared with you most recently in March. That translates into base rate increases of 25 cents per service charge to $1.40, or 25 cents per month for rate zone 3 customers, upwards of $2.60 per month, depending if for a full service customer in rate zone 2. Next slide, please. In addition to those primary service charges, we have additional rate adjustments, including a reduction in Wes's legacy debt component that's charged only to ratepayers in rate zone 2. So we are phasing that component out as we're utilizing system development charges from rate zone 2 to pay down a portion of the outstanding debt that was incurred by Clackamas County Service District number 1. And that does offset a portion of rate zone 2's overall rate increases. And Wes also charges a surcharge. We add a surcharge onto our rates for the cities that have a right-of-way fee. William asked a great question about this too. He asked if Wes does pass that on, as most other cities do, and we do. We don't want to cross-subsidize right-of-way surcharges that are remitted to the cities with other ratepayer funds. So these surcharges attempt to recover those fees from the ratepayers in those cities, and then we turn around and we remit those exact amounts back to each of the cities.
Aaron,
slide.
excuse
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
But following up on that surcharges, because that's something that still bugs me. There is some handling fee. There's some accounting costs in us returning those or recollecting those fees that we're asked to pay. How do we budget for that?
Yeah, good question. We absorb that. It's pretty minor. We have a pretty efficient way of tracking those costs and reconciliation, annual reconciliation that we've worked through with the city staff. So we're able to send our audit work paper and kind of report back, and then we make adjustments to the fees next year to ensure that we're tracking with what we collect and what we remit, but we don't have an administrative component in those surcharges. That is absorbed across all ratepayers.
I'm sure it's accurate and nothing hinky going on there, but it does bug me that we, in addition to having to pay those right-of-way fees, we also have to absorb the costs. Well, our ratepayers do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good input. Thank you, Adam.
Yes, if I remember correctly, you mentioned that Milwaukee was zone 2A, correct?
Yes.
So does the previous slide showing those rates apply to Milwaukee? Because I know the legacy debt does.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I should have included rate zone 2 and 2A on this slide. So only the wastewater treatment rate applies to Milwaukee, since Milwaukee has its own local collection system rate and surface water management rate. And then the offsetting legacy debt component also applies to Milwaukee. And in 2 slides, we'll see the breakdown by service area and rate zone, so you can see the overall impact.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so this shows the monthly bill changes for each of the cities and rate zones in Wes's service area. So you can see the components of the bills that are changing, and then the offsetting reduction in the legacy debt component. For Johnson City and Milwaukee, there will be no change in the monthly bill because the legacy debt reduction completely offsets the increase in the wastewater treatment rate. For customers in Happy Valley and unincorporated rate zone 2, the legacy debt reduction offsets a portion of the overall rate increases, so they see a relatively lower reduction. Unincorporated rate zone 1 represents a small portion of retail customers, about 500 units, and they don't have that offsetting legacy debt reduction, so they'll see the highest increase, which is just a 5% increase in their wastewater treatment and local collection rates of about $2.15 per month. Next slide, please. And kind of looking at where Wes's rates currently are compared to other providers within our area. So Portland is a little bit of an outlier here. If we took Portland out, it would bring the average down to $57.28. So Wes's current rates would still be below the area averages. We do try to stay competitive. It's not exactly an apples to apples comparison here. Each city has different circumstances and different regulatory requirements that are driving some of their costs. But we do take this look kind of region wide at rates, and certainly do try to keep ours as low as possible. Next slide, please. On the surface water side, again, Portland and Milwaukee are a little bit of outliers here. If we took those out, it would bring the average down to $12.52 per month. And Wes's rates are quite a bit below the average. We do have 5% increases planned to fund the capital investment in Wes's storm system master plan that was completed last year, as well as operating cost increases that are really driving the rates for stormwater. Next slide, please. So in the past, the industry standard for assessing wastewater service affordability was based on total annual service charges as a percentage of median household income. The EPA, American Water Works Association, and other agencies are now encouraging using the lowest quintile residential indicator, LQRI, or Household Economic Burden Index, to assess affordability. And that metric measures the portion of income spent on water services for the community's lowest quintile income, in a way to quantify the financial burden that relatively low-income households experience in paying their wastewater bills. Under Wes's new strategic plan, we have an initiative tied to that economic burden of maintaining a mid-range or low impact rating. The projected 24-25 full wastewater treatment and collection rate for Wes comes in at a LQRI of 1.38%. So it is a mid-range in alignment with that strategic plan initiative. Wes currently has a low-income discount program that reduces sewer service costs by 50% for eligible customers, and we do pass that discount through to our partner cities, who pass that discount on to their customers. We currently are limited in how we apply that program and are only able to extend the discount to property owners. So we're missing a large portion of the eligible population represented by renters and people in multifamily housing. So one of our initiatives for this next fiscal year, as alluded to earlier, is to update Wes's low-income discount program to be able to reach more people and to improve access and eligibility. So we're looking forward to doing that work. There's a lot of great models out there for low-income discount programs that can reach those harder to reach populations, and we'll be certainly sharing more about that with this committee. Next slide, please. Oregon, yes.
I'm sorry, so does that mean that you're gonna, that this will be extended to renters, or can you explain that?
Yeah,
Again,
that is our goal. We'd like to find a way to be able to extend the low-income discount program to renters and individuals that Wes doesn't directly bill, and that may entail partnering with another community organization or maybe another county department like social services, to be able to get that funding into their hands, since we don't have a direct relationship with them.
No, I just so you're aware, I'm actually on the community action board, on the chair. So I work with that. I work with the social services department of the county. I'd love to put you guys together to help move this initiative forward.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. I know City of Milwaukee does have an innovative program for low-income discounts where I think they partner with a community organization. So we might be looking at something similar. But yeah, any connections we can make on this, and getting folks with expertise in this area would be really appreciated. All right, so our system development charge increases are tied to the Engineering News Records Construction Cost Index, which is an inflationary index that consists of a basket of goods, just like any other basket of goods. In this case, the basket of goods are steel, cement, lumber, and construction labor. We're down to 2.7% in 2023 from a high of 7.2% in 2022, and the proposed SDC increases are based on that 2.7% rate. As shared earlier, we do have an initiative to update our system development charge methodologies this next fiscal year. That would be up to the board whether they want to adopt an increase based on those updated methodologies, as well as this committee for input. Our current proposal is less than full cost recovery. The last SDC methodology update we did was 2019, and that estimated a sewer SDC of around $13,000. So we're not charging the full cost currently, and that is being subsidized to a degree with ratepayer funds based on decisions made at that time by both this committee and the board.
Aaron,
Yeah,
excuse me, you mentioned something about an increase in SDCs. Are you talking about income received or the rate?
yeah. So good question, both. So the rate will increase, and then the population increase is a percentage of existing population, and as that goes up, we get slightly more
Of
new
course, yeah.
connections. Yeah.
Well,
So
and new construction as well, but the rates themselves are set by the municipalities, aren't they?
So West charges a regional sewer SDC, and that's collected by our city partners. They also have their own system development charge rates. So any of the cities, Oregon City, Westland, Gladstone, and City of Milwaukee remit SDCs to West based on what they collect to cover that regional sewer SDC charge.
I'm sorry, I'm just still not clear on that. I thought that the SDCs were collected by the city and used by the city. And you're saying that West has its own separate SDC?
Yes. Yep. West has a regional wastewater treatment system development charge that we charge.
Is that different than what the city collects? Because my understanding was that there are 5 SDCs, right? You
Mhm.
got traffic, water, sewer, stormwater, and parks.
Yeah,
And you're saying there's another one?
no, it is included under the wastewater SDC for those cities. That their
Okay.
rate includes West's rate as well as their own rate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, good question. Yeah, I wish I had a chart that showed the differential SDC rates. That will be part of the SDC methodology update that we share.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Right. Let's see. Next slide, please. So there's a lot going on here, but this graphic just essentially illustrates the variables in West's long-range financial plan. The bar charts represent our projections for operating, debt service, and capital spending. As you can see from the light blue bar, which is our operating expenses, that increases at a fairly steady rate each year. Those are incorporating the about 5% increases in operating costs. The dark blue bar is our debt service, and that stays relatively steady until we start to issue new debt in 26-27, which is represented by that dotted green line down at the bottom. And then West's reserves are that black dashed line. You can see that's coming down as we spend those reserves for the capital that's estimated until we get to a low of around $29 million in 30-31, and then reserves start to build back up again. The dark green line is West's revenue, and there's a little bit of a dip there in 25-26 because our current year's budget includes one-time financial resources from capital project participation and grant funding, as well as those higher interest revenue costs, and we're not projecting interest revenue to stay so high. So 25-26 represents a little bit of a dip before it gets back on to a steady increase based on population growth projections, as well as our anticipated 5% service rate adjustments.
I'm sure you could have put more on that chart. I just don't know how.
If you have ideas, please let us know. Next slide, please. I'm looking at the forecasted monthly charges under the plan at 5% increases for wastewater treatment, collection, and surface water management, and then that annual reduction in legacy debt represented by the orange bar until that bar is completely phased out. Our projection is for 2031 to have unified rates across our service area for wastewater treatment and collection. That could be impacted by a system development charge revenues. If those don't come in as anticipated from rate zone 2, we may have to push the legacy debt phase out by a few years because we do, under our foundational commitments, need to ensure that only rate zone 2 ratepayers pay for the legacy debt fee. You can see over the next 10 years, overall rate increases will bring West's full service retail rate, which is both wastewater treatment and collection, up to just under $70. If you recall back on the sewer comparison slide that we saw, 4 out of the 17 agencies in our area are already charging more than $70. So we're feeling fairly confident that Wes's rates will still be below or at about the average rate for the area in 10 years with these projections. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so Wes's Budget Committee is scheduled to meet on May 28th, 2024. Thank you to the members of this advisory committee who are dedicating time to serve on the Budget Committee. We really, really, really value that participation and your input. That meeting is at 10 a.m. And at that meeting, our Budget Committee, which consists of the 5 from this committee, as well as the Board of County Commissioners, will consider the budget, discuss any changes, and then vote to approve the budget. From there, the Board of County Commissioners will convene on June 20th to formally adopt the budget and make appropriations. The input from this committee's recommendations will be shared with the Budget Committee at that May 28th meeting. All right, next slide, please. And okay, so I'm so sorry, Neil, you had a question and then we didn't get to a point. So I think we could pause for questions now.
Yeah, we are at our time limit, so let's get our final questions in so that we can get a motion and finish up. So
Great.
what was Neil's question was about?
Yeah, it was really just about the River Health Grants
Oh.
program because we're off of that, just coming off of that right now. And I know that our organization was successful, but I know a lot of other virtuous ones took a bit of a haircut and it's becoming increasingly competitive. And I believe I understood that it was being shaved a bit to fund capital in this coming year. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
The River Health Grant Program is the same $300,000 that it was in prior years. But thank you that we did get feedback from Christopher Bowker and Rita. I think you may have chatted with Ron about the potential for increasing the funding for that program. And that's something that staff will definitely look into. We do have to balance increased funding for that program, which is optional, with the funding that we have for required maintenance of Wes's stormwater system, where we aren't quite meeting our goals for catch basin cleaning and other maintenance. So we are trying to figure out how to stretch Wes's finite resources to provide some more funding for that program.
But it's basically being held steady, but not adjusted for inflation or increased.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
That was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for Aaron? It was a great budget, Aaron, and a great presentation. And it's kind of a pleasure to be on this committee and go through a presentation where we have all of our reports together. We have our recommendations. We're very organized relative to what we might see elsewhere.
Agreed. Yeah.
If we don't have any other questions, the chair will entertain a motion to recommend to the Budget Committee approval of this budget.
So moved.
And a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Nope. Hearing none, I guess we better do the roll call, huh, Chris?
Oh, sounds good. I will take the vote. Rita Baker,
Aye.
Christopher Bowker,
Aye.
Christina Brow,
Aye.
Councillor Brike,
Aye.
Greg DiLoretto,
Aye.
Anthony Fields,
Aye.
William Gifford,
Aye.
Councillor Golaby,
Aye.
Brian Johnson,
Aye.
Roseanne Johnson,
Aye.
Councillor Khosrowbadi,
Aye.
Preston Korst,
Aye.
Catherine Miller,
Aye.
Michael Morrow,
Aye.
Neil Schulman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for reading the 150-page document in detail. So you had your questions answered. With that, I'm going to move over to Alexa's going to talk about our next Lunch and Learn, which is, I believe, Wednesday. Alexa?
Yeah, hey everyone. Hope you'll join us on Wednesday, May 22nd at noon for a 1-hour lunch and learn with Ron. And Ron will be presenting on, the title is Utility Management Series, Regulatory Affairs, with our very own Christopher Bowker as our facilitator. So you won't want to miss it. And I hope you'll join us as we dive into the world of regulatory affairs.
Great. I mean, this is pretty special. I sit on other advisory boards, and this is the only one that actually teaches us what we're doing. So the rest of them we just know. Anyway, wonderful. I hope everybody can participate. I know I'll be there. At this time, we go around the members around the room and report out on anything that you want to bring to the attention of the advisory committee. So I'll open the floor to anybody that wants to comment on anything. William, is that your hand?
Yeah, again, I apologize for being late. Was there a mention made of the Kellogg Creek
Yes, yes, there was.
extravaganza? That was
Yes.
that was excellent. That was
Awesome.
excellent.
Yeah, Greg mentioned that in his opening remarks, and I know you were there, and I was there from the West Committee. And it was Williams right, it was a wonderful affair. A number of people were there that had worked at the treatment plant back in 1974, so you can imagine how old they were, but they were there and provided a real historical perspective on getting the thing built in the first place and what it was like to work there 50 years ago.
I can
So-
say that 50 years, they looked amazing for having, I mean, there must be something in that water.
Yeah, we
That was
won't
a
go
lot of
there,
fun.
but yeah.
And then
Uh,
I just had one thing. So in our March and September meetings this year, we are doing, or we have it on schedule for hybrid. March was hybrid and September would be our next hybrid meeting. We didn't have a huge in-person turnout, so wondered if maybe folks preferred the hybrid, preferred just virtual, and maybe instead of a hybrid, we have an in-person, but it's more of a social, maybe a special session or something like that on one of our off months, an in-person get together where it's we can still have a meeting, but we can kind of also have a bit of social time too. So anyway, something to think on. No decisions need to be made today, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, and I'll probably send around a poll or something so we can get some see what everyone's preference is. We may not get a unanimous vote, but we'll at least get as close as we can to kind of what works for all of you. So more
Our
to come.
next meeting in July will be a virtual meeting, so
Yes,
we'll
correct.
be thinking about what you like and don't like.
Good.
Any other report outs?
I'll just share a couple of things from the North Clackamas Watershed Council side of things. We are obviously, with first of all, thanks to the West Committee for recommending our River Health Grant for funding to the Board of Commissioners. It's for restoration at Parmenter Ponds, which is increasingly becoming clear from our monitoring is a critical cold water refugia in the summer. It's where all of our summer eDNA from steelhead and rainbow trout are found. But the other big news is the sediment sampling for the Kellogg Dam removal project is going to be moving forward in hopefully the kind of first 2 weeks of June. There'll be a big barge in the impoundment, and we'll be taking those samples, and it'll be a fairly large production that sounds like a cross between the Jetsons and Mad Max with some of the equipment. But we'll let everybody know when we have a firm date and to come check it out. It'll be interesting.
Excellent. Thank you,
You
Neil.
had me at Jetsons and Mad Max.
All right. If there's nothing else, we will adjourn this meeting until July. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.